So we've reached the point in the evening I think everybody's really been waiting for, which is to hear the lecture accompanying this year's AGM. And as you'll see from the screen in front of you, we're very lucky to have with us this evening Professor Julia Hegewald, who is Professor of Oriental Art History and Head of the Department of Asian and Islamic Art History at the University of Bonn. Looking at Julia's CV, I can see that you've spent a lot of time in Britain.
Yes, very much.
So we can claim, obviously, as Britain, as London, to have played a part in getting you to Bonn. But I know that in the room you have your former PhD supervisor from SOAS. So don't be too intimidated by him sitting there. But more seriously, we're really very, very grateful for you to come and talk about this. And obviously, this is something very close to the Society's heart because it's in the building. So I'm going to hand over to you and let you just take the lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. Well, thank you very much for this very kind introduction and for the invitation to speak to you this evening. I feel very honored to have been given this opportunity, and it's wonderful to have so many colleagues and friends in the room and new acquaintances. Thank you very much for having come. The collections of the Royal Asiatic Society in London contain a marvelous example of a Jaina cosmographical painting on cotton cloth entitled Jambūdvīpa or Dvīpa, and these might sound like very strange terms to you right now, but we will come to their meaning in a moment. Now, it's a gouache painting on cloth created in 1816, and it was probably painted by Tilokachanda Dayachanda, or at least the writings were done by him. And it measures sort of 65 by 69 centimeters, and it's actually on display in the upstairs seminar room, and anybody who would like to see the original is welcome to go up afterwards and to have a look at it. Now, it was presented to the Royal Asiatic Society by Major General William Miles on the 17th of June, 1837. The aim, and we will come to more detailed views of it in a moment. The aim of such paintings, whether they were compiled in albums, as you can see here, of a much more modern, simpler fashion, or presented on individual pieces of cloth, as we saw in the Royal Asiatic Society example, the aim of these paintings is to help Jaina believers understand the cosmos. And by understanding the geography of the cosmos, the aim is to understand the way out of the cosmos, the way out of the world, which presents really the path to enlightenment. So at its root, Jain cosmology is not about the physical world. We'll see a lot of mountains and islands and hills, but it's actually really not about the geography of the external world of matter, but it is primarily about providing a framework for the understanding of the path to liberation. And as such, the aim of Jain cosmology, its main incentive is soteriological. It's concerned with the paths and the teachings of how to reach salvation. Here you can see a comparative example. It's not the one from the Royal Asiatic Society, but similar, the same genre, but this is on, again, on cotton cloth. It's from Gujarat, the neighboring state, and it's slightly earlier. It dates from the 16th century. Now, because of the important religious significance of a detailed understanding of the cosmos, the Jains have, and actually still do today, dedicate a large amount of attention to the study of cosmology. The beginnings of Jain cosmology date back to about the 6th, 5th centuries BCE, although the earliest texts or kind of later versions of earlier texts dealing with the subject date from about the 1st century of the Common Era. Now, the canonical literature of the Jains, the Agamas, as well as certain philosophical, scientific, and technical treatises provide us with very minute descriptions of the geography of the universe. And this is, I think, why the topic has been neglected quite a lot, I would say, in relation to other areas of art or literature, because they're incredibly detailed and a bit tedious, I'll say, to read. But I would like to focus with you on those items and kind of items of Jain cosmology which were depicted. And I think already now you can see how striking, even if they maybe without knowing much about them, they appear sort of abstract, but how striking these diagrams are. Now, although Jain perceptions of the cosmos are related to Buddhist, Vedic, and in particular also to Puranic ideas of the world, Jain cosmography clearly is distinct. And I know that there are a couple of Buddhist scholars in the audience, and I would be really interested to hear, about comparisons, because I really largely know about the Jain material. Now, somewhat confusing at first glance when we are dealing with Jain cosmology are the enormous numbers and dimensions one is confronted with when dealing with the measurements of this religious universe. And very often, I'll show you later, this is actually the universe as a whole. We'll see in a moment how it works. I'm showing you this now here because there's all these measurements written on the sides, the dimensions. Belonging to a religious world system, however, they too, these measurements, these enormous dimensions, have to be viewed from a soteriological viewpoint as well. In this context, the incomprehensible nature of the dimensions seems to express, I would say in a very striking way, the enormous difficulty of achieving enlightenment in such a superhuman system. Yeah. So in the text, we have two standard units, one called a rope, Raju, and the other is a yojana. And if we convert, we'll come to the details in a moment, this is the middle world, the world of man. And right at the center, the red dot in the middle, this is Mount Meru. It really seems tiny. You can hardly see it on this painting, but when you convert it into miles, this Mount Meru measures about 800,000 miles high. So it's over 1 million kilometers tall. So you can imagine if this is, we're looking onto it from above, but, it's a tiny part and it's so huge. You can imagine what kind of feeling you must have about finding your way out of this enormous kind of system. Now, the aim of my paper today is to present and explain examples of the translation of Jain cosmological ideas into the concrete shape of tangible art and architecture. And first, I want to start with the paintings, because I think they are very useful in understanding what these texts tell us. But then I would also like to move into the three-dimensional and show you sculptural and also architectural representations of these different worlds, which we as people can move through. So we can go to continents which are not accessible to us, which makes this, I think, very interesting. Now, because of the vast size and the enormous complexity of the Jain cosmos, only certain aspects or parts of it have been given visual shape. And it is fascinating to see which elements were chosen, and also when these commissions were done. The place where they come from is not quite so essential as these. The paintings come largely from Rajasthan and Gujarat, but the sculptural and architectural structures are found all over India. They're really pan-Indian. Now, because of the intricate nature of the Jaina universe, I will focus only on those aspects of Jain cosmology which are necessary for the understanding of the particular paintings, carvings, and architectural structures discussed in my presentation today. Okay, let's have a look at the cosmos. What does it consist of? According to Jain cosmology, time and the structure of the universe are eternal and self-created. As such, Jainism has no creation story, no cosmogony. There's no being creating the world. The Jain universe is believed to be vast but finite and to consist of two major elements. This is the world of existence in white here on the left, and that of non-existence surrounding it in blue. The world of existence is known as Loka or Loka Akasha, and the surrounding blue non-existence as Aloka or Aloka Akasha. And the world of existence forms the central core of this cosmic system and is surrounded on all sides by the holosphere of non-existence or non-world. And the inner core of the Jain cosmos is usually presented in this kind of hour shape, glass shape. In two-dimensional paintings. On the left, this is a wall painting. You can see quite a modern date from a South Indian temple in Tamil Nadu, a Jain temple. So we have two-dimensional paintings, but also these shallow carved panels depicting the Jain universe. And here you can see the one on the left is much more abstract. The one on the right has been personified. It's a kind of a human representation of the cosmos with legs apart and arms akimbo, kind of more representing the idea of the cosmic man, the Loka Purusha. And this painting from Gujarat from the 16th century shows you that the cosmic man can also be more be understood as a lady, a cosmic woman. Often we can't differentiate so clearly. It's a cosmic person also, but this shows variations in the depictions. Now, here two more similar representations. The various Jain descriptions of the universe all create a clearly tripartite arrangement, consisting always of a lower world, a middle world, and an upper world. And broadly speaking, the lower part of the universe here with different layers of the universe, it contains various levels of health. And the middle section actually should be a thin disk. If we're looking at the universe from the side, we should really only see the disk. But because that is quite difficult to comprehend or to see or to represent, the thin disk has been flapped around. So we are kind of looking from above onto it. So there's different viewpoints combined to make it easier to see the middle part. If I go back, you can see also in the painting this was done. So this is very common because it's just from a pictorial point of view more interesting and easier to understand. So the middle section is this thin disk, consisting of the human world and some areas inhabited only by divine beings. And the upper part consists of or comprises numerous levels of heavens. Now at the very top, and this is indicated here by these different moon sickles, it's a small delineated area, the region of the so-called liberated or perfected souls, the Siddhaloka or Siddha-shila. It's actually easiest visible here on this more diagrammatic, emblematic, symbolic representation on the right. And I'm including this, I mean, it's devoid of all the detail, which is so interesting for us. This on the left comes from a Jain temple in Kanyan in Rajasthan. But this is to show you how important cosmology and the cosmos is for the Jains, that it has been turned into kind of their representative symbol, a symbol of Jainism. And when the cosmos is more a symbol of the religion as a whole, its distinctiveness, we then find the open palm of the hand, which is a symbol of ahimsa in the bottom, one of the important tenets of Jainism, of not harming any living beings. And then we usually find a swastika emblem, which of course long predates the abuse in nationalist socialist Germany in the 1930s. Here it's a sign of great auspiciousness, of a sun, the sun cult, and of fertility, auspiciousness, goodness. And here in particular, in a Jain context, the four arms of the swastika represent the arms of the swastika show the four levels of existence of heavenly beings, human beings, hellish beings, and subhuman beings, by which they mean sort of flora and fauna. And then above this, there are always three dots, representative of the straight paths to enlightenment, which are correct faith, correct understanding, and correct conduct. And then we have that Siddha Shila marked very clearly at the top. So although we regularly find depictions of the entire cosmos, it is it is more common to have representations relating only to the middle world, which I showed you here, because this is where human beings live, and this is why this area is of particular importance. Now, the central part of the Jain cosmos, as we said, is a thin disk consisting of innumerable mountain concentric island rings, separated always by oceans. So we have one solid central disk island in the middle, and then always rings of water, and then ring-shaped continents surrounding it. Now, at the core of the flat disk is a solid circular island here or here visible, known as Jambūdvīpa. So this is one name which was given to the panel by the Royal Asiatic Society because this is the center of this painting. Jambūdvīpa means the rose apple tree island or the rose apple continent. There is a sacred tree in the very center close to Mount Meru, and other texts describe a kind of rock formation on Mount Meru resembling a rose apple tree. So we have two divergent stories here. Now, in the middle of the island of Jambu, this is again the central island, right in the middle, this yellow dot here, rises the Central World Mountain, and because it's very difficult to comprehend or see it when seen from above, many paintings add a side view of this Mount Meru with a sacred mountain on the side. Or here below in this painting, the mountain has been shown sideways while the island is seen from above. These are both gouaches on paper from the 18th century, so slightly earlier than the example we have here in the building. Now, the mountain is known as Mount Meru, which is something which we find, I think, in all South Asian religions as a name for a prominent sacred hill. But the Jains also refer to it as Sumeru Parvata or Sudarshana Meru, Mandara, or also Astapada. Okay, let's have a closer look at, this is a similar painting to the one held here. The innermost part of Jambūdvīpa, which is this rectangular item here, is known as Mahavideha, and it is surrounded on either side by three whitish regions. And these regions are separated from one another by long chains of mountains, the yellow and red mountain chains running west to east. And on these mountain ridges are lakes, the blue dots here. And these accommodate floating lotus-shaped islands. And although I'm mainly staying with the painting, I just want to show you with relation to these lotus-shaped islands in these lakes, how Jain architects picked up on these sometimes quite minute ideas or facets, and they today build these amazing lotus-shaped temples. The one on the left is at Mangitungi in Maharashtra, and the one on the right in Hastinapur in Haryana. Unfortunately, there's no water surrounding it at the moment, but you can see how appealing these descriptions are to artists. to find their own expressions, particularly today also. But let's return for now to the paintings. And the one on the right is again the Royal Asiatic example. This shows that various rivers spring from these, where we've said we have got these hills and the lakes, and rivers spring from these. Here's a comparative one where the blue is a little bit stronger. And these rivers run into what is called the Sea of Salt surrounding the Jambūdvīpa central island. It's the Lavana Samudra, which surrounds the entire island. Now, beyond this ring of water are then innumerable concentric rings of land separated by further ocean rings. So we have another ocean ring here, and usually the third ocean is not depicted because we are focusing here on the central island of Jambūdvīpa. Then human beings can live here in the center, but they can also live on the next island ring of Datakikanda, and then the innermost half of the third island half of Pushkaravara Dvipa. So the third, so it's 2.5 islands on which human beings can live, and this leads to the second name for the panel. Arai Dvipa means 2.5 islands. So these are the two terms used for the Royal Asiatic panel, either putting the emphasis just on Jambūdvīpa in the center or on the 2.5 islands, which are so important for us as humans, because this is theoretically, or according to the religious worldview, where we can live. And the third island continent has a chain of mountains called Manusotara, and beyond that hill of mountains, no human beings can live. This is where divine beings dwell. Now, Jambūdvīpa or Arai is also referred to as the Manusya Loka, the human universe, because this is where human beings live. Now, it's interesting, these 2.5 islands are so-called karma bhumis. They are regions of labor where people have to work very hard for their living, but where sacred teachers, jinnas, can be born and where enlightenment can be reached. Because in the Boga bhumis, where life is effortless and you don't have to work or lead ascetic lives, you can't reach enlightenment, and jinnas will never be born. So it's a very interesting view of our life or the path to salvation. Now, the central island of Jambūdvīpa, as you know, is surrounded by many more island rings. And this is very, very often depicted in these quite diagrammatic representations. We have Jambūdvīpa and the 2.5 islands. Now, interesting is that the only other island which is given a lot of attention in art and architecture is number 8. This is the white ring in the painting on the left, a 17th century gouache from Rajasthan. And this here is a more detailed depiction of this 8th island. So we have Mount Meru in the middle, and number 1 is Jambūdvīpa. Then we have the 7 island rings, and then more attention being paid to ring number 8. This is known as Nandishvara Dvipa. And you can always recognize it very easily because it's characterized by these 4 groups of hills, 4 groups of 13 mountain peaks positioned in the 4 directions of space, leading to a total of 52 sacred hills. And on the top of each hill is a self-created Jaina temple. So it's interesting, you know, often there have been debates in Jainism, should we have images, should we have temples? But this shows that also the gods have temples and images which are self-created. So this supports the Murti-Pujaka Jain approach where temples are being built also in the human world. I've only presented you with a very brief and simplified description of the Jain cosmos, and many of the diverse cosmological elements which were painted to illustrate often complex cosmographical texts have also been given 3-dimensional shape in sculpture and architecture. And I would suggest that the first aim for the creation of cosmological depictions, either in paintings or also in three-dimensional recreations, seems to have been to visualize the complex nature of the cosmos, to make it more accessible, to make it more comprehensible and understandable to people as aids in their quest for liberation. Secondly, I would argue that the distinct pictorial, sculptural, and architectural shapes modeled on these very specific Jain cosmological ideas were and are used today also to differentiate the art and architecture of the Jains from that of other religious groups, because there is a lot of sharing of ideas and terms, and I'm sure we'll go into that in the discussion afterwards. But elements such as Jambūdvīpa are completely unique to the Jains. So as such, pictorial or architectural representations of the Jain cosmos also play an important role in the creation of a distinct Jaina religious identity. Now, I would now like to show you a few more concrete architectural examples, because, for instance, the gateways, the facades, and also the entrance porches of many Jain temples all over India display representations of the Jain cosmos in this symbolic form, which we saw before. This is the entrance to a water temple in Ara in Bihar. Here down below, you can see again the cosmic representation on the facade. So when you're approaching this temple, you know, when you approach a Shiva temple, there often is the Nandi, the bull of Shiva, or in a Vaishnava temple, you have Garuda as the carrier animal of Vishnu. So in a Jain temple, you have the cosmos. This is their identifier very often. So also here, this is in Tamil Nadu, in Melsitamur, a Jain temple where you have the hourglass cosmos and also the Dvīpa on the side. I think you can just about recognize it. These kinds of representations can actually be very elaborate carvings, as this beautiful marble panel from the porch of a Jain temple at Palitana shows it. You can really see quite a lot of detail of the middle world of Jambūdvīpa, and Mount Meru is here seen from the side. You can see the 2.5 islands and the many rings, and then the 8th ring, again, given more importance. So very often we find these cosmological representations at the entrance situations, on the thresholds as markers. But the large painting, here's a man standing here. You can see how very, very large. It's larger than it's in the production here in reality in a Jain temple in Ponnur in Tamil Nadu. This is actually in the central shrine room. So it's not just an accessory, it's an object to be worshipped, because it's like a path to salvation. But here we have still, we have moved into larger dimensions, wall paintings and also carvings. But representations of Jambūdvīpa were also done in 3-dimensional form, in the shape of sculptural and large architectural models. The complex geography of the cosmic island of Jambūdvīpa here could more accurately be shown in much more detail. So here we have a cosmological temple at Bahubali in Maharashtra in central India, which is already quite large, but inside a temple, this is, to my knowledge, the largest here in the Nasyan Jain temple at Ajmer in Rajasthan. And it's interesting, the temple here was opened in 1864, which is about 50 years after the painting for the Royal Asiatic Society was done. So it shows how popular this topic was at the time. And you can really look down onto your world in this example. Now, these are all inside buildings. This is just one example to show you that such representations also exist open air. They sometimes have a little Disney-esque feel to it, but we should, not kind of be too stuck or, surprised by that. They are religious objects, and people circumambulate them, and they're really serious sacred objects. Now, what is probably the largest and most complex architectural reconstruction of Jambūdvīpa has been created at Hastinapur in Haryana in the very north of India in the late 20th century. And the vast reproduction of the central world disk measures 35 meters in diameter and is furnished with simplified mountain chains, the ones which I showed you in the paintings before. And we have these water channels, which are representative of cosmic rivers, and they're all labeled. So they really are meant to be educational or pedagogical. And you can, of course, see the Lavana Samudra, the Sea of Salt. You can travel on a little boat around it. And it encloses the entire structure. And at the center rises this enormous Sumeru Parvata, Mount Meru, in the shape of a roughly 60-meter tall tower. Now, I find it's very interesting because devotees and visitors can climb the mountain internally, and they look down from various levels and angles onto a miniature version of their own part of the universe. And through this, they partake in a view down onto the world, which in actual fact only the siddhas, the really enlightened beings, have. And I would argue that one might figuratively sort of anticipate one's own enlightenment or get an understanding, you know, which is much clearer here. So there definitely is this strongly religious connotation. Now, we have seen Mount Meru as such an important element as part or in connection with Jambūdvīpa. Now, I just want to show you a few examples to show that the Meru can also be venerated and depicted and is present in temples all over South Asia, also outside this very immediate cosmological context. So Mount Meru is described as having 3 terraces, and Jain temples all over India. The ones I'm showing you here all come from the north, from Allahabad or Jabalpur in Madhya Pradesh. And you can see that we usually have a jinnah seated underneath a canopy or a pavilion, which in the texts are described as self-created. And this is always kind of higher or more powerful than a man-made construction or image. So these are venerated in shrine rooms all over India and the Garbhagritas, and the Meru pedestals can be treated very differently, as you can see there, can be painted or elaborately carved. Now, Mount Meru, the central world peak, is actually also not the only sacred mountain of Jain cosmology. Interestingly, there is a group of 5 Merus, the Pancha Merus, which keep recurring in temple settings. I can show you later on one of the paintings, we can actually see a line of 5 sacred mountains. This is probably representative of, you know, anything that is really sacred should be in different settings. It should not just be in one part. So the Ganges flows in the north of India, but it has underground arms which come up at certain auspicious times in Karnataka or in other parts of India. So every island ring has a Meru as well. So it's this kind of multiplication of sacredness which we encounter so often in an Indian setting. So this is just an ordinary shrine room in Sanganer in Rajasthan, and the one here I'll show you later, a larger photograph. This is actually a Jambūdvīpa temple in Ponnur. Now, you remember that in the description of the Jain cosmos, the last continent was this AIDS continent, which in the paintings was easily recognizable via the 4 groups of shrines and sacred hills. I think in the one on the right, it's a little bit harder to see. It's a bit more cramped, but it's interesting because this is an example of a marble a representation from the 12th century already. This is very early for a cosmological representation. You can see Mount Meru and the 7 inner island rings, and then you have ring number 8. It's clearer here. This is from Taranga. The one on the left is from the famous Ranakpur Adinata temple, which many of you will have visited from the early mid-15th century, where it's interesting, one can really see the island rings, Mount Meru, and the 4 groups of shrines here. Now, we don't only have sculptural reliefs, but we also have sorry, I'm going too fast. We also have temples which completely recreate this Nandishvara-dvipa temple. So this is a drawing I made of a cosmological temple at Jalore in Rajasthan, and you can see the 4 groups of 14 temples here in the center. And the image on the right is a view into a Nandishvara-dvipa temple in Delhi, which dates roughly from the 19th century. And it shows you that while you're in it, it's also cramped. You cannot really see the logic necessarily so well, but you're entering a continent on which humans do not live, and where the gods venerate the Jinnah images. So from a religious point of view, this is a very interesting shift. Now, these are slightly earlier, but the next examples show you that there is a particularly interest in these cosmological shrines, well, from the 19th, 20th century onwards, and that they are also found all over India. We have an example here from Ponnur, at the bottom of Ponnur Hill in Tamil Nadu, a contemporary example here from Ara in Bihar, and again from Hastinapur, where there is a center which is particularly interested in cosmological themes. You find the groups of the mountains, peaks, and at the center always the 5 Merus, which I mentioned before. Right, to conclude, I've got quite a long conclusion. I want to show you a few images, but I want to pull it together now. The Jain texts on cosmography provide us with detailed descriptions of heavens and hells, of large numbers of world regions, island continents, oceans, rivers, mountain peaks, and sacred trees. And only a comparatively small number of these have been depicted in Jaina art and architecture. Most common are representations either of the entire cosmos. Remember, this is a wall painting from Mandu in central India, the hourglass shape, which there is again quite a lot of variation, but I think you recognize it quite easily. Very common is also the central island of Jambūdvīpa, or the 2.5 island rings here in also from a Jain temple in Mandu. You remember that the mountains, Mount Meru, but also a large number of other sacred hills played an important role, and that the 8th island continent of Nandishvara-dvipa played an important role in the representations. These particular items of Jain cosmology seem to have been chosen because of their particular relevance they have for members of the Jain community, for the human beings living on Earth. Jambūdvīpa lies at the center of our universe, and India, Bharat, as well as the rest of the physical world as we know it, is located here in the middle world. As the island of Jambu, as well as the next concentric 1.5 island rings, are the only places in the large superhuman cosmos where human beings can be born, can live, and attain enlightenment. So we can understand that this is really the main focus of depiction. Now, Jambūdvīpa and the Arai Dvipas are also where most of the Merus, the sacred hills represented in Jaina art and architecture, are to be found. So we have Mount Meru in the middle, and you can see here the 5 Merus are often shown on Jambūdvīpa, but I'll show you in the example from this house that they can also be placed on the next island rings. Now, these sacred mountains play an important role in Jaina mythology and ritual. It is at the top of mythical and cosmic mountains that baby Jinnas receive their first ceremonial bath from the god Indra, So this is again the 3 terraces of Meru, and we have the little baby Jaina seated on top and Indra here duplicated, giving the Jaina after its birth the birth ablutions on top of Mount Meru. So this is where they start their life and where they reach enlightenment, where they present their they teach they convey their knowledge to the others in a Meru or in a Samabhasarana. As such, sacred mountain peaks are symbolic markers of important points of transition in Jainism. Therefore, Jain devotees will endeavor to conduct pilgrimages to all sacred mountains at the top of which Jainas have attained moksha. Now, 20 out of the 24 reached enlightenment on Mount Parashnath, but Rishabha or Adinata allegedly gained enlightenment on Mount Shatrunjay, making this a particular famous and prominent pilgrimage site in Gujarat, particularly for Shvetambaras, but also for Digambara Jains. Many Jain temples also contain carved panels and painted versions of sacred pilgrimage sites, whilst sculptural models of these sacred tirthas and also architectural reproductions of the sacred mountains are further more concrete examples in a long line of sacred mountain images. And these are relief panels from Varkana in Rajasthan and a site in Maharashtra, Bahubali, where we have all, or at least a very large number of Jain pilgrimage sites reproduced, which you can go on pilgrimage to Bahubali and go on pilgrimage to 108 sacred sites at once. Now, according to Jain mythology and cosmological knowledge, only the gods can reach Nandishvara-Dvipa, and you recognize the 4 groups of hills and venerate the statues there, housed in the 52 shrines atop of these peaks. Therefore, an elaborate Jain festival, the Ashtanika festival, conducted 3 times a year, developed around the veneration of this particular island and gained great importance with the Jaina community. Because human beings cannot visit Nandishvara-Dvipa in real life, substitutes had to be created for the reenactment or the symbolic participation of human beings in this auspicious cosmic act. So we have these temples. This is a view into these mountain representations at Jalore in Rajasthan. So the Ashtanika festival is unique to the Jains, and the island of Nandishvara is of no importance to Hindus or Buddhists. As such, the concept of Nandishvara, as described in text and also represented in art and architecture, is distinctly Jaina. This point seems also to have played an important role in the creation of other cosmic representations and temple forms as well. And by concluding, I'm returning to the beautiful piece kept here in the building. Whilst there are certain links to Hindu and Buddhist world descriptions, the specific layout of the Jaina cosmos, I would argue, is distinct, and so are its artistic representations. The paintings, carvings, models, and cosmic temples provide the Jaina community with a distinct group of cosmic representations in art and architecture, as well as with a unique set of rituals and festival cycles which relate to specifically Jaina philosophical and soteriological concepts. From this point of view, it is especially noteworthy that the cosmological representation dates largely from later periods. They start sort of with the 13th century, but really only take off with the 15th, 16th centuries and grow in gaining importance to the present day. And it was mainly from the 15th, 16th century onwards that the Jains rebuilt many of their sacred pilgrimage sites, and their Jaina art, for instance, in the area of cosmological depictions, but also in temple art more generally, I would argue, developed a distinct language, differentiating itself from that of other religions in the subcontinent. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
So just to say thank you, Julia, for that. And obviously everybody in the room has just been sort of hanging on every image that you've shown with us. So you did mention at one point in your talk that you'd be happy for there to be questions, discussions. Definitely. So maybe we've got a bit of time for people in the room. They want to ask questions or
might just get a point out. Some notes in case there are some wonderful revelations. Right.
Okay, so I've seen a hand at the back and then that. So I'll just let Julia get herself sorted.
Yes.
And maybe if we could stand here just sort of near the microphone.
Yes, so that, I'm so sorry. So
okay,
the
we have
audience online.
Yes, person here.
Peter. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks very much. Upsala. No problem.
So you pointed out that not every part is attention.
As much attention, yes.
Yeah, but how do you explain, but do you have an explanation for the fact that most important
yeah.
So
I ask just for the benefit of people online.
Yes, I meant to repeat
back the question as much as
I meant to repeat the question so people on Zoom can know. So I've just been asked whether why the Siddhaloka, which is kind of the most precious, most exalted place in the Jain cosmos, has received so little attention. And I think this really has to do with the fact that it's not a tangible place. It's not about physicalities. It's not about depictions. It's really beyond. It's with a place where there is no bodily shape anymore, where it's the ideal which is kind of extinction, isn't it? I mean, or eternal bliss, the Jains would say, where, you know, everything dissolves one's shape, which we have as such an important issue in a lot of also in basing cults of you know, emerging in water, and you know, this kind of idea of not having a shape anymore as the highest, I think, is something which we encounter. You know, we don't want to give physical shape to something that has completely overcome this, and maybe it's not necessary. I think here the abstract can be dealt with by people if you know what I mean. We have representations of the Siddhas. They already are all the same because they have shed all their karma, which differentiates. So it's like a middle path onto the place where you really lose your shape. And I think that is best. I'm so sorry, I've just hit a button. I hope I haven't disconnected.
No.
Oh, great, thank you, wonderful. Does that answer your question? I actually understand why they wouldn't represent it. We actually, thank you. We have a few representations, actually, to be honest. For instance, in Tamil Nadu and Melsitamur, there's a large Jain complex. And there are representations where we have like the moon sickle and the jinnas kind of seated in it, or jinnas hovering above the ground. I don't know if you've seen them in my book. But I find actually the emptiness more representative, actually better. Yeah. Okay, I don't think I can explain it better, but no, that's great.
So we're
good.
The next question.
Yes, again. You're welcome. Absolutely, I'll repeat it. Thank you.
Just wondered if you could tell me from the very early parts of Jaina. You said borders of non-existence.
Okay, yeah.
What did Jain?
And they're very difficult questions. I'm an art historian.
I promise I'm not trying to ask.
Different concepts of nothingness actually definitely are a big thing in Buddhism. And I'm sure there are people who are, do you want to, I mean, on Jainism, I can't really differentiate between different.
Say that
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
State which
Mm.
so emptiness by it refers to a thing. So basically there is no attainment.
Okay. Yeah.
That is
Yeah. Sorry, I forgot to repeat it. Yeah. Sorry.
The right answer, because what the thought it's not my answer. I'm a devotee
Yeah.
of the universe.
Yeah.
And last week I was watching a stupid question to ask. I thought it was a bit of a cop out.
Mm.
That's a good thing.
I'll repeat it in a moment for the people online. Yeah.
There's
Mhm.
also something else about the question.
Mhm.
This,
Yeah. Yeah.
higher world,
Mm.
and with a lot of there's around human work,
Mm.
there's a relationship. It's recognized that where we are, and it's quite difficult. You know, it's
Mm.
here, and
Mhm.
it's complex.
Mhm.
So a lot of effort goes into the complexities of how to deal with that
Yeah.
physical
Yeah.
human world. And so once those knots,
Yeah.
imagine them like knots are
Mm.
released,
Mm.
then there's less and less
Mm.
actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that humanness of
Mm.
complexity proves
Yeah.
in the fact that we have a lot more, you know, it's being helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll have Anne in a second. I forgot to repeat for people online. We just had a question about differences between emptiness and nothingness. And emptiness seems to be more going beyond, and the nothingness more, it's concerned with a thing with no thing. But we agreed that this was quite a complex. In Jainism, I couldn't really differentiate. And we just said that, yeah, that when we get to that higher world, it's more about not so much about the physical features of our world, but a differently kind of. Anne, did you want to add to that, or right?
So we've got a
Different.
question then
Okay.
from Anne and then
Yeah.
from Giles.
Oh, great, good.
Yeah.
Sorry, I oversaw that. Yeah, I don't know. You're welcome to go first. If you had your arm up longer, it's fine by me.
Okay, Giles, then.
Yeah, fine. Thank you.
For your efforts to navigate soteriology in a large Western audience. If I may, I'm going to bring things back to think more physical and historical. I'm particularly interested in transition from two-dimension to three, from the painting, the relief structure, to architecture. I was paying attention to the dates.
Yes.
Your comments about technology or inclusion. And I wondered whether it's well, here's the question. So the two-dimensional things, obviously they're images on cloth or on painting, they date from when they date because of the material they're on. And one can suppose the history of those images, which is lost because of the materials. In the case of architecture, less so. But most of your architectural
are very late.
Later,
Absolutely.
Later. So is it the case that there is actually that there are not architectural expression of this idea, or hypothetically and controversially, would you read the Temple Chronicle in plan?
Okay, so I meant to repeat for the people in Zoom. The question was with regards to the switch from two to three-dimensionality and the three-dimensional architectural basis being later. And the question, are there maybe earlier examples? I would agree with you that I think we can I mean, the Adinata temple at Ranakpur is sort of mid-15th century. Yes, I would. Actually, there's also a Meru coming out of the ground and going into the sky. So there definitely are cosmological connections, and one could read the whole as a cosmological temple. I agree with you, because it's so structured and oriented, and it was meant to be 7-storied, although it now has only 3. But in a more indirect way, but yes, and I mean, also in Taranga there is Nandishvara-dvīpa, as a Nandishvara-dvīpa temple, a small one, which probably dates from the 16th century. So I think we can probably, you know, go back to this kind of period, 15th, 16th century, for the earliest architectural examples. But I have the feeling it has really taken off from the 16th century or from the 18th century, that we really have much more examples. During that time when, after a difficult period of invasions, of a lot of destruction in northwestern India, Jainism rebuilds and reconstitutes itself and looks for a specific, not, you know, I mean, the Jains are always very interconnected, and you know, there's lots of linkages, but giving themselves a more distinct character. And at that time, I would argue that temple architectures become more complex, and more distinct features such as the cosmology get more emphasized. And there's more interest and more research put into it. You know, the Hastinapur, it's a center for studying Jain cosmology, and they have this amazing architecture. So it's actually a religious study center which, you know, works with architects, and they express it kind of. It's understood as a kind of self-definition of having, you know, emphasizing their distinctiveness. And this really only starts from the 15th, 16th centuries onwards, that it becomes such an issue, or it becomes so obvious. Thank you. Right.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
2 aspects.
Yeah.
One is mentioned it briefly.
Yeah.
About it. James performing meditation.
Mm.
You spoke about some.
Yeah.
But I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
That's also about it wasn't.
Yeah. Mm. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I was asked about performing devotion, other aspects than circumambulation, maybe. Circumambulation, I would say, is the devotional ritual which has shaped the temple architecture most prominently and very, very strongly. Most visibly in eastern India, or in coastal Karnataka, where we have, you know, really onion-shaped temples with masses of ambulatories, where this has really been taken very far. Otherwise, ritual practices are reasonably similar to, I mean, there is that a lot of sharing of, you know, washing, of bathing, also using, you know, milk and cooling paste such as camphor or sandalwood. In Shvetambara Jainism, definitely also flower offerings, arati, waving of lamps. That is actually quite similar. In a Digambara context, it can be more reduced, and of course the non-image worshipping Jains don't perform that, but there is a lot of similarities, and I think I would say the other rituals have not really shaped the architecture quite so much. I mean, we have this channeling out of the sacred liquid, as we also find in a Hindu context, on the sides of temples, also often with a makara or cow head. So there is definitely a lot of sharing, which makes it so interesting. But I think, you know, there are certain areas where one wants to be a little bit different. One doesn't want to be mistaken for a Hindu temple. Then I was also asked about diaspora temples and cosmology in those. I'm sort of, I've made the big case for cosmology being the distinctive feature. I think in the diaspora, this is not such a huge issue, because you are kind of Indian and you almost kind of want to be part of a big Indian culture and not to be a tiny minority in it. So we very often find like the Jain temple in Leicester combines, you know, Shvetambara, Digambara, and even non-image worshipping sects together. They worship together. Or I've been to a Jain temple in Toronto, which even had Hindu and Jain images in one space. So I think it's more about coming together and being a unified cultural identity and not stressing the differences so much. Whilst in India, where you know, there's a large Hindu majority, maybe you want to be a little, you don't want to be sidelined or speak against anybody, but you want to be a little bit more, have more distinct flavor. I think there's more, a larger community to kind of, to support this kind of niche or a separate identity, maybe. Yeah, okay. Richard. Yeah.
Richard, and then
Yeah, Richard, great. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, yes.
I think it's that some of these three-dimensional
Yeah.
were associated with
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Memory in my brain about of wheel of life.
I'm Buddhism. Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Diagrams that you get around.
Yeah.
But is there a sort of
Yeah.
route?
Okay. Okay. So I was asked about cosmological representations in entrance situations in the Jain temples and whether there might be a connection to wheels of life in Buddhism, also in entrance situations in Ajanta or in later Buddhism. I would think that the positioning and having something which is representative for your religion is a common thread. So we associate the wheel of life very strongly. Everyone wouldn't say it's the symbol of Buddhism. I wouldn't go that far, but it's something which it's a recognizing feature. So on that level, I would agree. I wouldn't go as far as saying, because they're both circular, you know, the Jains might have copied it or the Buddhists might have, no. But the idea behind it, I absolutely agree. I think there's a common underlying idea, just like we have in Hindu temples with Nandi or with Garuda, like a marker, something which is typical, which makes, to somebody approaching the temple space, makes it easy to know what kind of temple they are approaching. On that level, I would agree. Thank you. That's a very good suggestion. Yes, and they're both cosmological. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Great.
Okay, so we have a question from Liz, and then I think we'll probably
Yeah.
the end, and maybe one more from there.
Yeah,
So
great.
This will be our last two
Okay,
questions.
thank you.
Daughter.
Yeah. Okay. I've been asked about 2.5 island continents on which humans live. Is there a difference between them in status or whatever? We don't, as far as I know, we don't have concrete information on this. Also, how does it work? I mean, it's very difficult to, I think we have to regard this Jain cosmology as a religious reality, which cannot be easily tied down to our physical world here. So, I mean, there is a certain correlation is being made between Mount Meru and Mount Kailash, which, you know, in the Himalayas, in Tibet, and Jains go in pilgrimage. Ayodhya is a site which is mentioned in Jain cosmology, but it does not appear to be possible to say, okay, India is, I mean, where are these island rings? I can't tell you, I mean, we obviously all are on the inner, or we are on one island ring. It's very, does it make, I mean, but it doesn't seem to trouble people, It's the idea that there are parallel realities. In Jainism, supports the idea that there is not a single viewpoint, that we have multiple viewpoints which are all correct and coexist. So this is not a question which arises when we talk about Jain. I can understand that it arises to you or to us, but it's if I've asked priests in temples or monks, they've said, well, if you are sort of tied down with the physical world, you really don't understand what this is about. But I mean, I can see that, it comes up, but I can't answer it because the texts don't actually explain, at least not the ones I've dealt with. So there's also, I think I showed you this, the five mountains all on Jambūdvīpa. Now here, the Panchameru are all on the different islands. So there is a certain amount of variation, sometimes even contradiction, which is not perceived as troubling by the believers themselves because it's so complex that they say, of course, we can't comprehend it all. But unfortunately, I can't make it more concrete and translate it more. I think we have to really think of different realities which are equally right and valuable and which coexist and which cannot really be superimposed completely neatly, if that is enough, right? Thank you. Yes.
Thank you so much, Jaina.
Thank you.
So brilliant.
Thanks.
With so many
A lot of material. Yes. Yes.
But just a really simple question. I'm just wondering whether colour is used in particularly or represent very way. It reminds me, I mean, looking at it, I feel much more of a sense of connection to yogic cosmologies, the inner world. Wondering whether the colours also.
Yes, I've been asked about colors and the meaning of colors in these cosmological representations. I mean, the texts really say Mount Meru is yellow and the first mountain chain is red and the next is yellow. They don't necessarily explain why that is the case. Sometimes the color is actually the name of something. With the Nandishvara Dvipa, they are curd-colored mountains and they have descriptive titles with it. It's not just the color. I mean, red and saffron or yellow, they are definitely perceived as sacred in ritual materials also. Brown doesn't come, there's not much brown and no black, no gray, it is auspicious colors, green, blue, red and yellow, but the texts themselves, as far as I know, do not explain the colors as sacred, but it's interesting that they specify them. And although there's a certain amount, the colors in this painting are a little bit more faded or a little paler, but blue is still blue if it's light blue or dark blue. It's never a black sea or anything. Yeah.
So the fact that colors are there also in the
yes, yes.
You have the
yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah. Great, thank you.
That's been, I think, a really fascinating sort of Q&A discussion.
Yes,
but I think we've reached a point where we need to give Julia a bit of a rest. And so thank you very much. So this is just the end of the formal part of the evening, please.